Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dharma and Justice Dialogue series hosted by the Thich Nhat Hanh Program for Engaged Buddhism. My name is Peace Twessiji, and I'm the director of the Thich Nhat Hanh Program for Engaged Buddhism, as well as Buddhism and Interreligious Engagement, where students are pursuing graduate degrees here, all within Union Theological Seminary in New York City. So today's conversation will be with Reverend Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas and Reverend Gregory Cosin Snyder, and they will be speaking about breaking the cycle of injustice. Reverend Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas is the interim president of the Episcopal Divinity School. From 2017 to 2023, she was the dean of the Episcopal Divinity School at Union Theological Seminary and professor of theology. She also serves as the canon theologian at the Washington National Cathedral and theologian in residence at Trinity Church, Wall Street. Prior to Union, Douglas served as professor of religion at Goucher College, where she is now professor emeritus. Before Goucher, she was associate professor of theology at Howard University School of Divinity and assistant professor of religion at Edward Waters College. Ordained as an Episcopal priest in 1983, Douglas holds a master's degree in theology and a PhD in systematic theology from Union Theological Seminary. Douglas is the author of many articles and 6 books, including Sexuality and the Black Church, A Womanist Perspective, Stand Your Ground, Black Bodies and the Justice of God, and Resurrection Hope, A Future Where Black Lives Matter, which won the 2023 Grawemeyer Award for in Religion. Her academic work has focused on womanist theology, sexuality, and the Black Church. And her partner in conversation, Reverend Cosin Gregory Snyder, Osho, is the Senior Director and Assistant Professor of Buddhist Studies at Union Theological Seminary, where he oversees the Master of Divinity program in Buddhism and Interreligious Engagement, as well as the Thich Nhat Hanh Program for Engaged Buddhism. Professor Snyder is an ordained Zen Buddhist priest and Dharma transmitted teacher in the lineage of Shunryu Suzuki. He co-founded and is currently the senior resident priest at the Brooklyn Zen Center and Ancestral Heart Zen Monastery in Millerton, New York. He is one of the founders of the Buddhist Action Coalition, whose mission is to organize and inspire compassionate Buddhist initiatives in advancing social, economic, and environmental justice through advocacy and nonviolent direct action. Professor Snyder's academic and practice interests include socially engaged Buddhism, the intersections of contemplative interreligious dialogue and social action, the relationship between Buddhist liberatory practices and social transformation, and the exploratory juxtaposition of Buddhism with liberation theology, earth-centered cosmologies, and Western continental theory, particularly phenomenology and post-structuralism. Professor Snyder is currently working on a book exploring expressions of social justice rooted in Buddhist Dharma, moral epistemology, and praxis. He has been published in Buddhist and other periodicals, including Buddha Dharma, Lion's Roar, Shambhala Sun, and the New York Times. So today's conversation will explore what their particular religious traditions, Christianity and Buddhism, have to say about the quest for justice by working with these questions. How do we break the cycle of injustice? How do we claim our humanity in an inhumane world? How do we repair the breach between what is and what ought to be? So before I hand over the mic, I would also like to say a quick thank you to the communications team who has helped bring this event into reality, and also the ASL interpreters here tonight. And for those of you in this Zoom webinar, the Q&A box is open, so feel free to put any questions that come up throughout the conversation into the Q&A box if you would like the speakers to respond. You can find the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And for those of you on Facebook or YouTube, we'll do our best to bring your questions in for the speakers to see and respond to as well. There'll be time reserved at the end of our time together for your questions to receive their responses. So that is all for me. So thank you all for being here. And now I'd like to hand over the mic to Reverend Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas and Reverend Kosin Gregory Snyder.
Thank you, Peace, so much. Peace is I always say, heartbeat and backbone of the Buddhism program at Union, and just grateful for everything you've done to bring this together. So thank you. And I am excited to speak with my dear friend Kelly tonight.
Yes.
To say Kelly is a brilliant interlocutor in this, and brilliant mind, radiant heart, and a dear sister and friend. We've been talking about this issue for a while in one form or another, and I'm not going to say we're coming with you to with answers to this, but we are coming with a conversation, and it's always just a joy to learn, and I'm always learning from Kelly. So thank you for being here, and thank you for taking the time.
Well, thank you. And before we jump in, I just have to say that that's mutual. Greg, we have been in this conversation for a long time, and we've been in this conversation because, I've been in it because we do learn together, and I have not only learned from you, but been inspired by you. And I've been on this journey. My current theological journey really is a journey of trying to understand this matter of justice. And so what a privilege really to be on this journey with you and in this conversation. And I am humbled, truly so, by your gracious words as we just journey together. And you are my brother, and so we journey together in this on this quest for justice. And so I just also want to add, so that no one thinks we're going to come up with all the right answers. I hope, as I often say, that at least this conversation raises new questions and insight through questions.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking about the way, what's always a joy being with you is not only do we struggle with this, there's just always a lot of laughter, a lot
Yes.
of, humility and understanding that we're wandering in the dark, and there's little bits of light here and there that help us along.
That's right.
But,
That's right.
So in this question, this is something I'm going to ask you right out of the gate, which is, here we are talking about breaking the cycle of injustice.
Mm-hmm.
What in your mind, what in your heart hinders that?
And as you often do, even when we're sitting around the table drinking matcha tea, which you introduced me to, you always start out with the easy questions, right, Greg? So here we go again. Let me see if I can't begin get an answer to this, because this is the thing that you and I have been struggling with in this sort of trying to understand the meaning of justice. For me, I talk about it as divine justice in a time, in a world where it just seems not simply as if God's justice is elusive, but a world where sometimes it seems as if God or the divine, and whatever language one may have for that being, is not. And so, we struggle with this. And so what is it that hinders our moving more toward justice, if you will? I think, when we talk about justice, what it sort of invokes the conversation is the reality and the recognition of the cycle of injustice, right? That we just seem to be trapped in this endless cycle of injustice. And so the question becomes, how can't get ourselves out of that? Right? How do we break that cycle, that cycle of, I say, injustice is nothing less than sin, and from my theological and faith perspective. So how do we break that cycle? And injustice itself is violent. And so yet we seem continually, even in our responses to injustice, to still be trapped in the cycle that is injustice, in the cycle of sin. And so I guess the first thing that I would say in response to your question is that we first have to recognize how, excuse me, even our responses to that which we call unjust or injustice is too often as well a reflection of the injustice itself, so that we are continually trapped in this very cycle of violence. And so that would be my first response to that. And I know you're going to follow it up. I'm going to let you follow it up with, so how do we get out of it, or what does that look like? And let me just say a word about that, and then I'll end. What do I mean when we find ourselves trapped in this cycle and trying to respond to injustice itself? Oftentimes, right, what I've become aware of, and it's playing out on a world sort of a stage right now. What I become aware of is that when an injustice has been inflicted upon us, right, we sometimes confuse, if not oftentimes confuse, accountability with retribution. Right? It is one thing to hold someone accountable and call for accountability in relationship to the acts of injustice that, let's just say, people have committed. And it's another thing to ask for or to engage in retribution. Retribution is not accountability. They aren't synonymous. Moreover, retributive justice is no justice at all. Retributive justice is an oxymoron, because it seems to me that what retributive justice does is it further exacerbates, if you will, the sort of distance, the oppositionality between two parties. It doesn't bring us together in relationship. It moves us further apart. Retributive justice makes enemies of people. It does not bring people into relationship. Retributive justice creates harm. It doesn't bring healing. Neither does it, you see, get us out of the cycle of injustice itself. It doesn't respond to the injustice. In that regard, it doesn't take on let's put it this way, it doesn't take on the injustice. Rather, it is responding in a retributive kind of way to the perpetuators of the injustice, and we mistake that, or we try to claim that as some sense in two words of accountability, or we say that it's justice. You always hear the language, oh, but we have to we need justice for X, Y, and Z, and that often is retributive, and it keeps us really responding to the cycle and trapped in the cycle of injustice in the first place. I hope that makes sense.
It's really clear, and I always love your clarity around this, because you nuance the many ways we use the word justice, and they're not always pointing to the same thing, right? And this idea of justice as retribution, and what I've always loved about the way you talk about this is that you talk about the cycle of injustice, and for Buddhists, we love that, because we think about the karmic regeneration and how there are these patterns that are of intention that are in the mind and that are in the body. And so if something happens and we respond to it, in Buddhist language, if our intention is not wholesome, if it is not an intention that is including the people we're
Mm.
with, but one that's defensive or protecting or separating or whatever, then whatever our conscious intention is, I really want to fix this problem. I really want this cycle of injustice to go away. What we end up doing is actually pushing further separation and so on. And so what's happening in our conscious thinking mind is I'm addressing injustice. What's happening in our unconscious intentionality is I'm recreating the separation that is actually the causes and conditions for that injustice in the first place.
Break, how then do we, right? Because this is what always interests me.
Yeah.
When you speak of the, because I think, yeah, that's right. Sometimes I think that our intention in the first place is for retribution, but let's go with this sort of karmic reality, right?
Yeah.
And I love the way you talk about this and the way Buddhists talk about it, even when I don't try to even understand it more. How do we get to, what is it that forces us to get to that hidden intention, right?
Yeah.
How do we get, and how do we break that pattern, right? That if I hear this right, it is a pattern that is beyond any one individual or any one community. It's a pattern that is beyond even one sort of historic period, right? It's sort of like what we say in our tradition, the sins of the parents, they use patriarchal language, and maybe we should in this instance, the sins of the fathers will be visited upon the next generation and the next generation. And I always take that to mean that if you don't break that cycle of sin. So how do you break, what's that look like in karmic reality? How do you break that intention that is not even voiced?
Yeah, it's a really good question. You always pose this, and I've been thinking about this in a slightly different way lately. And I think I'll move in the karma part in a minute, but I think the first thing that we have to do is it actually has to be a moral desire to do that in the first place. Because I think one thing that we do is we take legalistic frameworks and we mix them up with moral ones. So we say things like, well, you can't hold somebody accountable for something they're not conscious of. Well, within a legalistic framework, that's absolutely true. We don't want to send somebody to jail for something they were doing unconsciously, right? But I don't think that plays in the moral world. I think in the moral world, we actually have to say, I am going to take moral responsibility for the things I'm unconscious of that cause harm.
That's right.
That has to be an intention. We can't reduce it to the legal framework. So first of all, we have to have that intention. We have to say, I am going to devote my moral life to uncovering the things that cause harm that I don't know I'm doing. So that's one, right? If we don't have that, forget it. Right. So, but this thing about karmic regeneration, I mean, there's actually the Kama Sutta, which is from the early tradition in Buddhism. When the Buddha is asked about karma, he says, if we're looking at present day karma, then we're looking at greed, hatred, and delusion. We're looking at the things we're actively, consciously doing. If we're looking at past karma, he says this really interesting thing. He says, it's in the organs of the eyes, in the ears, in the nose, in the taste. It's in the body's organs itself. It's so in our being that it's the way we look. So if we take white supremacy, right? It's not just some abstract set of ideas. It's in people's bodies. It's how they scan a room. It's how they see bodies, right? So if we are not willing to admit that, then I think we have trouble. But the thing is, we have to be able to do that within our own bodies, and then we have to recognize that institutions, organizations, and societies carry karmic trajectories. Redlining, these things, we do something, we put it in place, and now redlining has an entire karmic force that creates neighborhoods and defunds them and everything else that it's operating. So somehow we have to be functioning both in the way that this karma is being internalized unconsciously, and we're bringing it up and looking at it and taking moral responsibility for it. And we have to look at the way that it's embedded in white supremacy is embedded in our institutions.
Yeah, so it sounds like what you call karma, and is what I might understand as a legacy, right? Right, a particular the legacy that is white supremacy, right? And that legacy carries forth not only institutionally, right, in the way in which white supremacy continues to try to protect itself and the institutions, the policies, the structures, all of those things that we know about that protect it. And so we have that sort of legacy that are the artifacts of white supremacy, or represent the institutionalization of white supremacy. We have that legacy as well that is the culture of white supremacy, etc., right? What we often don't talk about when we talk about this legacy, and I, by the way, like to talk about the legacy that is white supremacy, of which slavery is a part of that, right? Is a part of that, because I'm talking about the legacy of slavery. Yeah, there is a legacy of slavery, but that reflects the legacy of the founding identity of this nation, which is a white supremacist legacy. So with that said, what we often don't talk about when we're talking about the legacy of something like white supremacy is I like to say, the epistemological legacy, the way in which we know, right? Not the material, and the legacy that impacts our moral imaginary.
Yeah.
And so, right? And so that legacy, which you might call sort of the karma, that's the sort of internal realities. So how is it, right, that something like white supremacy, the injustice that is white supremacy, has so corrupted our moral imaginary, right, that we can't imagine this reality really of divine justice? It has so corrupted our moral imaginary that we began to equate justice with privilege. For instance, how do we get out of that trap? And so, because we have not sort of, so what you're calling this internalization, or this sort of karmic reality, is like this sort of the internalization that we are not aware of. And for me, one of the most significant aspects of that is the way in which it's corrupted our moral imaginary, that we can't even imagine justice anymore. And that keeps us generation by generation trapped in this cycle of injustice, right?
This is so important, your point, because one thing I've been thinking about is the progressive movement, right? And when we look at King, even Malcolm, there is a vision, and even with Malcolm, who was very critical, there is a vision of a nation of people. There is a future, right? Especially in King, right? There is a sense of a future nation that is this just nation. Now, and I think this points to the degradation you're talking about, now you hardly hear this anywhere. The folks who have the future are the ones who are owning white supremacy as their own, consciously, right? They have a clear notion of the future. They think in terms of that, right? And so it's what is there is some way that we have to move, and this somehow, for me, this rides the relationship between retribution and really meeting injustice with justice, which is we can't just be in a critical, responsive relationship to what's going on. We have to claim our imaginations.
Yeah. So yes. So I'll say a couple things. And tease it out. You all are witnessing the kind of conversations I know you are probably saying, "Oh my gosh, these two are truly geeks," right? And right. And when you're my age, being called a geek is a compliment. But But Greg, help me here as you say this, and you raise King, and you raise Malcolm, and we can raise a Fannie Lou,
That's right.
Hamer, and others as well. We can raise a Pauli Murray as well into this conversation with a Malcolm and a Martin. And so what is it? And you say, they weren't simply responding to something, but what is it that allowed both of them to have a moral imaginary that embraced a different future, a different world, a future where I like to say we're the first or last, borrowing from Christian Testament, and the last or first, not because there's a reversal of fortunes, but because the first are last, the last are first, that everyone is respected equally as the sacred creations that they are. So how could they do that? And if you look at, I think, let's look at King. One of the things about King as well as Malcolm is that they came to understand the meaning of justice from the vantage point of the very peoples who were on the raw, especially Malcolm, the
Yeah.
raw underside of justice, right? And so that they didn't begin with trying to understand justice from the position of those people, really, who are enacting injustice, from the position of those people who enjoy, quote unquote, a sense of privilege within an unjust structure in society. No, they began to understand that from the underside. And it is from the underside, it is from those people who have a real sense, because they've experienced it, of injustice, that there are those people who know what justice must look like. And for King, you talk about our faith traditions, for King, this was all about the cross. This was King understood. That's the thing about the Black faith tradition at its best, right? They understand the God that the Jesus on the cross and what that meant, and that Jesus was crucified indicated Jesus' utter, uncompromised solidarity with those of the crucified classes of people, if you will, of his day. And when you start there, you can begin to really understand the radical, if you will, demands of justice. Otherwise, all you try to do is protect an unjust system so that you can protect your privileges. And what you do, what we've seen, right, is what you call justice is just opening up a little bit, giving a little bit, little folks a little bit more privilege, while at the same time never changing the system of injustice in the first place, never breaking out, as you have put it, that cycle of justice. So I say, yes, let's point to King and them, that they started on the underside. And then the last thing I'll say about that, listen to King, right? King was always accountable to that more just future, like as I want to say. King always had his eye on that more just future. King wasn't simply responding to the injustices, racial injustices of his day, the poverty of his day. King was responding to that which he knew was the justice of God. King, he held himself accountable to that. That's why, borrowing from Theodore Parker, he talked about being on the arc that bends toward justice, because he kept himself on that arc. So anyway,
no, this is fantastic, Kelly, because now I'm gonna whip back to the imagination piece. There is something, first of all, from everything you just said, there is something very clear that the moral imagination cannot be nourished within the present system, from inside of it.
That's right. That's
right. It can't be. It will always be constrained by self-protection. Yes. Right? So that's a key piece right there. If the moral imagination is constrained by self-protection, it cannot do what it needs to do. right? So to step into this space, Malcolm on the street with the, where I mean, that was the thing that Martin always loved about Malcolm, right? He could walk up to the guys in the south of Chicago and start talking to them, and Martin knew that wasn't his thing, right? But that space, which is not inside the self-protective system itself, is the space where the moral imagination can align with, we'll say for now, the transcendent, the future that is beyond all of this.
And who's in that space? I'm not going to cut you off. This just who's
go.
in that space? Huh?
Well, the people who are in the space who are the people who are oppressed by the,
exactly.
It's always the oppressed, right? Yeah, absolutely. Marginalized, oppressed, those who don't have the power.
That's right.
Those who don't have the power to manipulate the current system.
That's right. That's right. No, that's right. Yeah, yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily mean that the karma of the system or the white supremacy hasn't infected those spaces. Certainly, right. that happens, right, in damaging, horrible ways. But there is something about this that system not working for you. This is a funny way to say it. That frees the moral imagination to do what is just.
Yeah, no, I think that's yes. I think, and that's why, I mean, in my faith tradition, that's why any understanding of the meaning of God's justice always must start with the oppressed. Jesus didn't proclaim his first public sermon, the Spirit of the Lord is up on me, I have come to set the captives free. He wasn't just saying that to hear himself talk and borrowing from Isaiah and trying to be poetic because he didn't have nothing better to say that day. He was actually really defining. This is his first public address, right? His first public sermon. And what it does is it defines his ministry. And it defines, I have come to set the captives free. And as great Black homileticians, they will have all these analogies, not to set Herod free or not to do this, right? I'm Episcopalian, so I don't know how to do all that, but all those kind of metaphors. But it is theologically significant. And when you ask that initial question, and see how you get my mind going here, Greg, because when you ask that initial question, how do we break this cycle of injustice? How do we really begin to talk about the things that get in the way of it? Well, one of the things that gets in the way of it is the ways in which we enjoy privileges that come from injustice itself. And so it is no accident. This is why, God is wiser than us all. We know that God enters our history from the Christian perspective. God enters our history on the side of the oppressed, because it's not that the oppressed are without sin and all of those kind of things, but they have that. If anyone has the ability to see justice beyond the false narratives of justice, then it is they who are on the very underside of these realities that we call justice. And I'm going to shut up here because it's why. So, like in the 1619 Project, one of the things that Nicole Hannah-Jones and her other colleagues point out is that anytime this nation has moved closer to a democracy, right? It has been because of the struggles of those people, in this instance of African Americans, the struggles of those people, right?
It's always true.
To see justice. And what we don't understand, that is when we began to try to erase our history of those struggles, what we are really doing is erasing our history from the making of a democracy, and erasing our history of the movement toward justice. And so that, all these things theologically come together for me, because that is the testament, I think, in our faith tradition of the cross, of the Jesus and what he's saying in that first sermon, the Jesus that was born in a manger, as they like to say, and not in Herod's palace.
Mm-hmm. I mean, this is the thing. So you come in on the thing that fuels it, right? You name the thing that fuels it is those of us who are having privileges that are being served and born of injustice itself. So how, and this is a little rhetorical because I want to respond to it, then I want to hear you. How do we come at that privilege, right? And this is the interesting, this is where I'm going to bring Buddhism in the side door, right? Because the first teaching of the Buddha, the first thing that he said is to come out, as the tradition tells it, is to come out and say, first thing, this human life is suffering. That's where you start.
Mm-hmm.
You start as suffering. Mm-hmm. And then the next thing you ask is, what are the causes and conditions of that suffering?
Mm-hmm.
And then you find out the means by which those can be relieved, and then you practice that, right? I'm leaving out some details, but that's the basic structure.
No, I like that. Mm-hmm.
You know, it's the basic structure. So, and one of the major things that causes the main cause of suffering in Buddhism is the attachment to our own self-protection, our own minds, our own keeping things the way they are, right? And so there is some way by which we have to be able to do the spiritual work of not attaching to our privilege, of seeing it and releasing ourselves from it so that we are not, and this is a heavy lift in this culture, which is telling us to attach, just screaming in our face, you need to be afraid and attached to everything that you got because somebody's going to take it, right? And so that work of not attaching to privilege and addressing the replication of injustice are brought together here.
Yeah, no, I like that. Yes. How do we disattach from our privilege? How do we, and I want to pick up on this that you said that is central to Buddhist thought. And this is starting with our suffering.
Yeah.
And what it means to suffer. I translate this from my perspective into empathetic regard. How, empathy. And how we have become, borrowing from the words of one of my friends who's a psychologist, Ron Hobson, victims of empathetic incapacitation, he says. How has that happened? So in empathetic regard, we can talk about it as compassion, if you will. Means really being able to, one, see yourself in another and another in yourself, so that the pain of another becomes, the pain and suffering of another becomes your own pain and suffering. Greg, to me, this is the seat of our very humanity.
That's right.
And our very humanity is defined by being able to have empathetic regard, compassion, if you will, for another. This, to me, is what it means to be created in the image of God, because God, this God in whose image we claim to be created in, from my Christian perspective, is a God who, the best synonym for that God is love, but is a compassionate God, right? And so that's the seat of our very humanity. And so inasmuch as we cannot make the suffering of another our own, we are alienated from our own humanity. And so what causes that? And I say that, the very stereotypes, ideologies, biases, whatever, this culture of injustice that causes us to see another as less than human,
Mm-hmm.
And so that we can look at the suffering. I will never get used to, and that's probably the wrong word. I'm outraged and cannot comprehend how we can witness day after day after day the suffering of, let's say, children,
Yeah.
and not feel anything about it, not do anything about it. That's a loss of that's empathetic incapacitation, the inability to have compassion for the suffering of another. And how do we do that? Because, right, we hide behind and we protect ourselves through these ideologies, these systems and structures that don't simply marginalize another, but to say those that we have marginalized are indeed not human. Right.
Yeah.
And we have done that from the beginning of the foundation of this country, to be sure. And so I hear what you're saying. And so I want to know from the Buddhist perspective, what we do about that. It's one thing to say we start in suffering, but we have become so estranged from our own humanity that we cannot even see or appreciate the suffering of another as if it's our own.
Yeah. So first I'll say the word that gets translated, and then I'll get back to here. The word that gets translated as compassion in Buddhism is karuna, but karuna is the root kir, and
Is
kir
the root what?
Kir, K-R, kir.
Mm-hmm.
And that root means to act. So it's not just that you feel the pain of another person, but that
That's
you
right.
feel the suffering of another person so thoroughly that you want to end the causes and conditions of that suffering.
Yes, yes, you said that
So
word.
it's
Yes.
beyond just feeling it. Now, what gets in the way? What gets in the way is everything that you mentioned, the way that we're trained into othering, dehumanizing ways of being from the time we're little babies. And we're just raised to think that this group of people chose to be in the position they're in. They want to be in this dehumanized place, that, you know, all of the things, but also there is a way that we cut off from ourselves. So how are you going to address it? One of the ways that Buddhists will address it in a formal spiritual sense is you have to actually do the work of feeling the suffering and pain in your own body. You have to wake the body back up. Without the body, you're not going to feel it. This is not an intellectual exercise. If we've all gone Cartesian, which many of us had, and it's neck up reality, then the whole system that tells us when we're harming and when we're, because a child still has this in place. A 2-year-old can't stand seeing somebody unhoused without food. It brings them to tears because their body isn't cut off yet, right? And our bodies get cut off. So we have to actually do that work. I don't think it is simply, this is a mistake I think gets made in the Western mind, is that we convince each other of another set of ideas. You know, learn that white supremacy is bad and you should do something else. Just think something different. That ain't going to do it. It's just not going to do it. You have to decolonize, get that way of thinking out of you, but you also have to get it out of your cells and out of your body and wake your heart back up and get all this back online again. And that's work.
So, Greg, I'm gonna be bad. I'm gonna be bad. How in the world
are we gonna get everybody to do that?
No, well, there's one group of bodies that I'm most interested in. How you get them to do it? How you gonna wake up the white body and get the white body collective when indeed everything about who we are as a dominant culture is constructed not to do what you're talking about, not to wake up the white body. And just when, and oh my goodness, I can't believe we're using this word wake, because, you know, like woke. And that has become isn't this funny? An immoral word now that has become a word to signify injustice. So how do you wake up And I want to know from a Buddhist perspective, I want to know, let's make this, how you going to wake up the white body? And especially now, because it looked like the white body collective was beginning to wake up. And then those people in power said, oh, no, 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 no. Because if they wake up, then it means that we might lose our privilege. That, you know, those we have minoritized will, we will have to recognize that we have minoritized those who are really a majority, and we might lose our privilege. So they've done everything possible to keep the white body, if you will, asleep. So I just want to know, because, you know, I want to know, this is the way when I scratch my head, how in the world, from your perspective and tradition, can we wake up the white body?
See, so you're asking a bigger question for me, which is because I can tell you one by one how that can happen.
Mm-hmm.
I can give you the, you know, this is the process. We do this kind of work around whiteness. We bring Buddhist, you know, practices to whiteness so that people can see the way it's in the body and so on. We do that work. That work is happening. And it is effective, but that's a small number of people. So if we're talking about the population, I wish I had better news, Kelly.
Yeah.
Because I think it's pretty it's got to be pretty cataclysmic.
Yeah.
You know, because I agree with you. The forces that are keeping this in place are hell bent, and they seem to be willing to burn down the house,
right,
to keep it in place.
Right.
So that to me, that kind of commitment, like to keep white supremacy in my house in place, I'll burn down the house where I want to keep white supremacy in place. That's a tough thing to respond.
Well, I mean, but it's happened, you know, historically, and I want to get to this even theologically. I mean, when people said, no, you got to integrate swimming pools, they closed all the pools.
That's right. That's right.
So, I mean, this is nothing new. When I was in high school and the desegregation, I was in Ohio, in Dayton, Ohio, and the desegregation decisions came down, and they said, no, now y'all got to desegregate these schools. You all got the bus. We went to school one day and they collected our books. They closed the schools. So they would rather not have swimming pools, even for their little precious children, and not have schools, then have to integrate. So this is nothing new, burning down the house in order to protect your modicum of privilege, your unjust privilege. So, you know, so we're just seeing it on a wider scale in terms of burning down the house that is on its way to democracy, then really creating a democracy where everybody is treated as the sacred human beings that they are. And so, you know, this to me then is the challenge for those of us who claim to be, going back to what you've said earlier and began, claim to be guided by a higher moral principle, a higher transcendent call of justice, that the challenge for us is to do the work, to change the narrative, to do the work. And I think, Greg, you talk about what the work you all do with whiteness and Buddhism with individuals. That's important work. And we do the work on that level, and we hold people account on higher levels. And so we have to get engaged in doing the work of justice, because ultimately for me, it's not about waiting for God to come down and God's more just future boom is going to come. And this is where I've been changing. I've been on this journey of trying to understand justice. It's not about waiting for that just future. It's about participating in it, and making making justice. And so the call of that future, that's what King and was doing. The call of the future is that we participate in the justice making. And that's where we know justice.
You know, the thing, and I agree, and just to add a little more pain to this, the thing that always, and we've talked about this, there is a kind of a collapse, and I believe it is related to the white supremacist current that's under the society that is self-protecting. There is a collapse of the moral relationship of action and consequence.
Mm.
We don't collectively buy sin anymore. We don't trust the legal system that makes that connection between action and consequence. We know that meritocracy is a farce, right? So what is the thing that says this action is connected to this consequence, and this is why that matters for us, and we should do it? And I think the systems have been so usurped by white supremacy. Sin has been usurped by white supremacy. Legal system has been, meritocracy, they've all been usurped by white supremacy. So we have to get under it all. And this is where I'm going to bring in we have to get under the real cause and condition of the alternative. And we have talked about this, which is we got to go to love.
Yeah. Yes, I want to go to that, but and say, what's interesting, and again, from something that you said earlier about the suffering, and I asked the question, how do white people get to that point? And sometimes I think, and it happens when they suffer from something they've done. And sort of that they, and I mean that in sort of general terms. I don't want to do the us and them, but when those who are enacting injustice, when their own system and the things that they have done come back to bite them, and they suffer, and to really help them to name and recognize the source of that suffering. So I think, and I don't want to go too far with this, but at all, but I sort of think of, we know that well, I'll leave it there.
No, I'm gonna go with this, because I think you have a point. And not just in the big, they do something and institutionally cause, but to actually, and this is harder to do at a mass scale, but to actually recognize that no matter how privileged you are, white supremacy, patriarchy, whichever system of domination we want to pick, is
they're all together. That's white supremacy hinges on these things.
Yeah, they're destroying your insides. They're destroying your humanity. They're cutting you off. You are suffering. You're not suffering in the same way, clearly not, but you are suffering. And so that pain needs to be felt. But this is the thing that I find striking, and this is related to not being able to see the vision of a different society. I think most people being raised in this, don't have an experience of the wholeness of their own humanity.
Yeah. See, I think,
that if you don't have that experience, then you don't know what you're cut off from.
Yeah. So let me, let me from that in two ways. One, it reminds me of what James Baldwin often said, right? And that the people whose humanity is really at stake,
that's right,
are not the people whom they are subjugating, but those who are doing the subjugating, are not the oppressed, but those who are oppressors. Their humanity is the one that is really at stake. And for all of the reasons that you just named, in terms of, and then I'm going to go back to Baldwin in a second, in terms of, I'm going to take the risk and go on out here, sort of in a less abstract way. When we look at what's going on in our political cultural scene today, I am like struck, if you will, by the fact that here's what we know. We know that over 50% of white women in this country who were in the electorate voted for the MAGA vision.
Yeah.
Right. We know that, right? And then they had the Women's March, and I went down for the Women's March. I thought, if all y'all voted didn't for who you claim you voted for, then how did this happen? Because that march was packed, right? But that aside, so they voted for that vision, right? We know that from the surveys that came out afterwards, et cetera, from the polling data. Over 50% of white women voted for the MAGA vision, right? Which stands for all of the things that are happening now that they knew that stood for, because a part of that MAGA vision was the overturn of Roe v. Wade. It got overturned. These white women, where it looked like, I don't know, race or something trumped their morality, suddenly these white women that voted for that MAGA vision now feel the pain and the suffering of the realities of the implication of that. And so it's this ironic now, right? They're trying to roll that back and the implications of that, and how now women who have felt the pain of that, other women, I don't mean the women that have always, women of color and poor women have always recognized the realities and the pain of that. But these other women of privilege who have recognized the pain of that now, are driving the electorate in another way. All right. And so that's why you see all this people trying to sidestep what they've said and not said in relationship to women's rights to make choices about their own bodies, right? And so to me, that's one good example. I just had to say, oh, and I don't mean a ha 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 laugh, the paradoxical laugh is that when those who are in privilege really began to feel the suffering of these unjust policies, laws, and systems, then we began to see a change, right? But there's still a missing piece, because that change, as they feel the suffering, is not that. How do we connect them to the people who are always on the underside feeling the suffering, right? And so how do you move people from, and I don't know, as I said, I'm going out on a limb here, and I'm making, I know that I'm generalizing from data that we have, but I want to use it as a point. How do you make a move from this still more individualized, idiosyncratic suffering to the suffering of another? You feel it, but now how do you get people to make that connection? The last thing I'll say, back to Baldwin, and I'm going to shut up, is, to your point about the humanity of people. Baldwin said this about white people, in his book that was of essays that was posthumously published, called The Price of the Ticket. And Baldwin asked, right, in that introduction of that book, he's asking the question, what is the price of the ticket to be Black? And he was talking about Black and male in America. He said, well, we can ask and answer that question. There's another question that has to be asked and answered. And this is the question that white people don't ask. What is the price of the ticket to be white in America, right? He says, you came over here as Irish, as Italians, or whatever, and you became white. What is the price of that ticket? One price of the ticket we've been talking about is losing our very humanity, your very soul. Baldwin says, go back, tells white people, go back and trace your steps and discover when you became white, and then ask yourself, what is the price of the ticket that you have paid to be white?
Yeah. The thing that concerns me is when you
just one thing.
Yeah, no, this is a big one though. The thing that concerns me, and I don't want to think this, but it is a possibility, And it goes back to the thing that you just said about MAGA and the abortion issue, is do white folks in this country need to suffer so intensely to see what it's in? And you know, the last thing I want to believe is that it will be fascism itself. You know, because white supremacy's ultimate logic is going to be some form of fascism. That's its ultimate logic.
Yeah.
If it's unrestrained, it's going to move in that direction.
Yep.
You know, if there isn't, as you're saying, this historic resistance of Black folks that move it towards democracy, of women's suffrage that moved it towards democracy, right? If there isn't this thing moving it toward democracy, there's a whole slew of folks we know from the beginning. They didn't exist yesterday. The right-wing Christians were against the revolution, right? So this has been going on for a long, long time. And that movement is going in that direction. What I pray for is that we can, going all the way back to your point, how does this happen for the large body? What I pray for is there can be an awakening before we have to go to such a level of pain that's required for that awakening. Because if you look at your personal spiritual path, that's how it moves, right? If the awakening doesn't happen, your habits are going to just drive you to a point of pain where it's going to happen, you know? So collectively, is that where we are?
Yeah. So, you know, yeah, because here's the thing that you say, and thinking about this and getting back to your thing of love, because I think that's right. Here's the thing, you know, God, back to retributive justice. God's justice is not retributive. And so
Yeah.
when we, in my tradition, hear these things about sin being visited upon the next generation, it's not that God is creating this pain and suffering. It is the consequences of our own behaviors, just as you've just spoken about, the consequence of our own sin and the cycle of sin in which we are trapped. And so it's like God don't have to do nothing to us. God's not seeking revenge, and it's not retributive. It's what sin does. It's staying in that cycle. And you know, and I always say, you talk about love, that you know, God is trying to love us into loving. God is trying to love us into loving ourselves, which is connecting us back to our humanity, loving one another, and loving us into a, if you will, to borrow from King, a beloved community. And so that the thing that breaks us out of the cycle of sin, that is violence, is not violence itself, is the nonviolence that is love, that is not passive, that is not, you know, this romanticized notion of love. No, it's active, it's oppositional, in the sense that it opposes that which opposes the love of God. It heals, doesn't harm, it brings people together, it doesn't pull people apart, and it does the hard work. God's love forces you into the hard work of finding a way back to yourself, back to community, etc. And so I think you're right that, you know, and so when I think of the love of God in relationship to justice and divine justice, it is a restorative love. It is a reparative love. It's a love, I like to say, that we think of reparations and repairing the breach, that repairs the breach between our unjust present and God's just future. And so it is a reparative love in that regard. And so I think you're right. And I have, you know, I used to shirk from this love talk. But I think that's right. And when we understand divine love, that God is consistently trying to love us into loving, and doing that hard work. And so that's the only thing that's going to get us out of this.
I think you're right. And then what is it to really cultivate ourselves and cultivate a community of love, which is not everybody's off the hook for their karma in our
No,
language, right? It's not everyone's off the hook, but it is,
nobody's off
I'm
the hook.
gonna love everybody who's on the hook. You know,
But
it's like, yeah, I have to love people through the transformation. I have to love myself through the transformation.
that's right. And because I love you, I'm not going to let you act like that. Because
That's
right? Because I love you, I'm going to call you to account. And so love always requires some form of repentance. And in my faith tradition, repentance is this not, oh, I'm sorry, and then going back and doing what you were doing in the first place. Repentance is about turning around, recognizing the harm you have created,
Yep.
recognizing the unjust realities that you sit in, recognizing the ways in which you have benefited from that, recognizing the privilege that is whiteness in this instance in which we are speaking, recognizing that, naming it, and then turning around and doing something different. And knowing that it's not a once and for all thing, you got to keep turning around and doing something different, because we all slip, but doing something different. So you're right, that's love. So love ain't easy, right? It's not an easy love. It's not like, oh, I love you, and and I always say, no, it's not. Love isn't, we're just gonna reconcile, because to me, right, reconciliation follows justice. In fact, we won't even have to talk about how we're going to reconcile, because it will come. What I want to talk about is how we're going to act justly, how we're going to enact justice. If we enact justice, reconciliation is a moot point. And that to me is the love of God, right? God didn't suffer fools lightly, and called them to account. At least the God in my tradition.
No, and I think that's a perfect place. I'll say one more thing, which is when you were talking about repentance, the one thing that struck me too is that I always have to repent too when I have lost faith in love.
Yes, that's right. I like that, Greg.
It's like, when are the moments where, oh, I have lost that
I agree.
felt sense in this moment, that orientation in this moment. Yeah.
Yeah. Nope, I agree. I mean, that which I say out loud, I say to myself.
Me too.
I'm serious, because Lord have mercy. It's not hard. It's not easy to not be enact retributive and want retributive justice.
Yeah.
It's not easy. It's not easy. I've written about it. It's not easy to continue to believe in the justice of God and recognize that God that is trying to love us into loving. It's not easy. And so, yes, what I say out loud, trust me,
Yep.
I'm saying to myself.
Okay, why don't we, that's a good place to maybe turn to comments and questions. What do you say?
I think so.
Yeah. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you so much.
Thank you, my friend. And thank these people for listening to
Yes, exactly.
conversations we have over tea and coffee.
Yes, I've definitely appreciated being invited into this conversation. Yeah, it's really been thought-provoking. So I'm going to pull a question that was most recently actually provided, and also to say to all of you listening, please also contribute to the Q&A box if you have questions you would like a response to. So this first one here is talking about this extreme level of suffering you're talking about perhaps white folks will need to feel into to awaken. And so the question is, how do we prepare for this spiritually?
Kelly, you want
Greg,
to take
that's
a
you.
shot?
Oh, that's you.
I whatever is foundational for us, whether that be God or the earth or whatever that is, we need to deeply ground into that presence. There has to be something there's the Buddha's story of when he has his awakening. There's the Mara figure who comes and brings an army and to push him off his seat of awakening and liberation. And Mara says to him, actually the army says, we are Mara's witness in this strength, this kind of armed military strength. Who is your witness? And in that sense, in that moment, the Buddha touches the earth and the earth shakes his witness. And I think we have to ground ourselves, ground our bodies, ground ourselves in this and cultivate a spirit and that can metabolize pain and that can metabolize the pain of this work and the pain of the things we're going to have to take on and what we're going to have to recognize ourselves, and the humility that the histories that we have internalized, that they are affecting how we're behaving, that we are lost in these systems of domination, that we do get confused, and that we have to be able to have enough of a grounded being that we can look straight in the eyes of that and be honest about it and do the work in community of transforming it. So whatever our ground is spiritually and community, beloved community, which Kelly brought up a few times, we have got to have a beloved community we're working with. Yeah.
No, you said exactly what I was going to say at the end. The only way that I know is that we have to be a part of a community that that loves us, and you can't do this work in isolation. And to recognize it's something they say in this one of the exercise things that I participate in, but also something that I recognized when I was teaching at Goucher College. Students would come back, and I wasn't teaching, sort of about whiteness or the kind of thing that we're talking about, but they would learn a different history, in the courses that I would teach, and they'd go home. These were sort of privileged white kids, and they'd go home for Thanksgiving, and they would come back so angry. And to help people to understand that the anger you feel is really grief, and grieving that which they would be angry at their parents or whatever. How come I didn't know this? And grieving that which you have to lose. You have to lose that sense of whiteness and privilege that you didn't even recognize was a part of who you were. You lose that sense of hetero privilege, lose that sense of patriarch, whatever it is. We there's enough privilege and penalty to go around. Lose that sense that we thought defined who we were, and people get angry, and to recognize, no, that anger is grief, and to live into that grief and let it happen.
Yes, thank you for that. And we'll stay with emotions for this next question. It just shifted. Let me get back to it. So this question is about fear. So can you speak to fear and how it's a driving factor in the persistence of white supremacy, and how love can meet and address this? And if you can give some examples with your response, that would be really appreciated.
All right, Kelly, you're starting on this one.
Oh, see, I should have started on the first one. Yeah. Fear is a real thing.
Yeah.
And I really do think what we're seeing in our society today is, as my friend and colleague Robbie Jones talked about in the White Supremacy Too Long, I think, was that we're seeing the last gasp, right, of white supremacy. They recognize that those whom they have minoritized are a majority, and trying with all their might to hang on to the power that is white supremacy. And there's a fear of what they lose, a fear of the consequences of living this long under white supremacy. It's so funny, you know, during the time of before apartheid was nominally dismantled and came to an end, there was a fear of the minority white folks that kept apartheid in place, that the people of color would rise up, and then if apartheid was no more, and that they would be victimized and victims of something like the Nat Turner rebellions, right? And so there is this fear. I think that is really driving, and as well. So you have that on the one hand, and then you have people like the architect of the MAGA movement playing upon people's fears, right? Playing on those people's fears, the people who are already dispossessed. We aren't simply talking about, in this instance, even people of color. We're talking about playing on the fears of the poor, playing on the fears of the marginalized, disenfranchised, poor white people, again, playing up on their fears. And then you scapegoat those fears. That's how fascism works. And so you scapegoat other people as the cause of why they are not able to rise up, why they are poor, why they are not enjoying the benefits of being a citizen, if you will, for in short shrift. So people play on those fears, and they play on the fears of others, so to protect themselves and to ameliorate their own fears. So I think that's right. How oh boy, how do we respond to those fears? Well, one way in which, and I think this is what love does. Love speaks the truth. We need to start telling the truth. There have to be other voices that are not afraid to tell the truth of what is going on. We need to listen. And I'm not talking about the fears of the privileged. We need to listen to the fears of those who are marginalized. We need to listen to them. We need to hear those fears and respond and speak the truth. What we have done is we've left open a vacuum so that other folks can speak into them. And this is what we have, sort of this divided reality. And so I don't know. I don't have the wisdom to that, except to say that question is right. It is about fear. And yeah, Greg, do you have any wisdom on that?
And I'll speak to the maybe the white fear, which is going back to Baldwin. You know, this giving up, of our ethnicities, this giving up of our deep heritage of ancestry, of a relationship to a people that was connected to the earth among all the other peoples connected to the earth, and that's key, alongside of. Giving that up for a category that unifies us based on power. Whiteness is not an ethnicity. It's not a people. It's an agreement that keeps a certain way of looking in power. And when that is what you have become used to, if that's the only way you understand why you are joined to another person in a so-called race, then everything looks like domination and power to your eyes.
Mm.
To your point, Kelly, you think it's going to be flipped if you give up, because your eyes have been trained to only see domination and power. But the thing is if we give up a body that is invested in whiteness and find our way back, trace the way Baldwin said, trace those steps back to what it was to be a people among peoples. What you are surprised by, actually, is that you join the world.
Mm.
You join the world. You're not trying to own it. And yes, that's a terrifying thing. There's not always a community waiting for you when you give up your allegiance to whiteness. It is a lone in the desert period. There's no question about that. But you end up being able to join the world. And the only thing that makes us afraid of losing power as white people is the belief in whiteness itself. If we didn't believe in it, then we would be people among people.
I'm
And
sort of,
go ahead.
no, I'm sorry.
No, I think that's good. I
Yeah,
know
no, I
that's
was just sort of laughing inside as you were saying that, because the fear is recognizing in whiteness that the emperor has no clothes. Whiteness
exactly.
is right. It's like, yeah, whiteness don't exist. There's smoke and mirrors, people.
It ain't a thing.
And it ain't a thing except it is, right?
Yeah, except it is.
But it's smoke and mirrors, and I think that's great. That's the fear, the
Yeah.
emperor ain't got no clothes, and the fear of recognizing that, and so clinging to whiteness, because whiteness is a construct that is only has meaning in opposition to that which is non-white.
That's right.
It emerged and defining those who were not white, and it's an oppositional construct, and it has no foundation beyond that of oppositional, subjugating, oppressive power and domination. Without that, well, the emperor has no clothes. The smoke and mirrors, and that's the fear.
And if you want a concrete example of love and giving that up and moving from fear into relationality with our friendship,
Yeah, yeah, yep,
that's about
yep,
as concrete as I can give right now.
yeah. That's right. And yes, and the willingness to do the hard work to stay in it, and to be honest with each other, and to see each other as human beings,
Yeah.
even as we are both shaped and socialized into this world of oppositionality, if you will, but to move each other beyond that. That's right.
Yeah.
And yeah, yeah, that's right.
Beautiful. So we're going to continue with the body. So Kosin, you spoke a bit about karma earlier in the conversation and connected it to connecting with the body and feeling into the body. And this person is talking about perception of the body. Maybe it's not it's beyond just feeling, but also perceptions and the body's perception. So the question is, what is the role of the body in moral imagination? And how is the body not the individual?
Oh, well, the body is not the individual. I'll just say, I mean, it's a huge question. I'll start with body and moral imagination. In my experience, there is nothing more dangerous than an untethered intellect. Because the intellect without the heart, and I mean the physical heart, feeling the energy of the heart, right? If we have our rational capacity can justify a concentration camp, but the heart cannot do that. The heart will not do that, right? And so to be an integrated body, and this was the genius of an Enlightenment European thought, is to separate the rational mind off from the body so you could dominate. And if the body is included, my body is, what's fascinating to me is my body is deeply moral. It does not want to just punch a person. It does not want to harm a person. It doesn't want to, there isn't a desire in this body to make somebody other. My intellect my rational thinking can be convinced of that. I can be traumatized into it, but it is not something that happens with my body on its own. So I think there's something about dealing with the traumas in our body. I consider white supremacy a trauma. dealing with the traumas in our body and moving through that so that we can open up to its relationality. And I don't think the body's an individual. I think the body is relationality itself. Or what we call, we look at the skin as a boundary, but really the skin is the thing that connects us to everything. Everything, it's a connection point. It's not a border. So if we understand ourselves as relational beings in that way, then my body is a certain way and my mind and my heart is a certain way because of Kelly right now. Kelly is more me than any idea of me that I'm having at this moment, because that's who I'm in relationship with. That's what's affecting me. So understand that that's really how we're living. We're really living in deep relationship with each other. And if we don't feel that, then we are confused. That's my sense of body in this. I don't know if that's helpful. Kelly, what do you think?
Oh, I was hoping you wouldn't. Throw it
You
back to
don't
me.
need to say anything.
Yeah. And someone, I guess the only, thing that I would say is you were talking, it made me think about is that we have to, back to fear, we have to get over the fear and recognize our own vulnerabilities as human beings. We are finite
Yeah.
human beings, as vulnerable as anybody else. There's no whiteness is not going to protect us from what it means to be human.
Yeah.
And what it means to be vulnerable and what it means to feel pain. And we try to protect ourselves from the vulnerabilities of our own humanness. And when we do that, we construct these systems and structures that other human beings, so that we can then say, oh, we aren't like them. And what we really have to do is connect back to our own humanness and not be afraid of our own vulnerabilities, our own finite, mortal vulnerabilities, and to recognize that we can suffer just like other people suffer, and so there's nothing about them that makes them any different than we are, and that we are no different. We are not protected from pain and suffering. And so let's stop constructing things that try to protect us from those things. So yeah, and the other thing that I'll say about our bodies, which you just said, Greg, is that our bodies hold memories. Right? We may not be able to remember in our minds an incident, but our bodies hold the memory of the pain. Students oftentimes and others talk about being triggered. That's our body responding. And sometimes we don't know, but our bodies they hold memories. And so just to be in touch with who we are as embodied beings.
Yeah.
All right, I have one more question for you. And apologies to all of you who did send in wonderful questions that we won't have time for, but we'll close with this one. Can each of you speak a bit to how we might nurture and cultivate our moral imagination, even though we've all been conditioned by white supremacy and all of the rest?
Greg, you can start with
No,
that.
that's your camp, sister. Come on.
No. Look, and I'll say this quickly, and there's more, but let's just say one easy or not easy, but one step to cultivating and broadening our moral imaginary is stepping outside of our own comfort zones.
That's right.
And engaging with peoples and communities that are different from ourselves, and that's how we expand our moral imaginary. And always trying to, as we engage different see different things, different stories, different acts of injustice, etc., always trying to engage that from the underside. But we broaden our moral imaginaries by stepping outside of our comfort zones and outside of our own comfortable spaces.
Yeah, and I don't really have any. The first thing that came up for me was listen to the people who are harmed by the system that we live in, and listen, and don't know. Just don't know. To listen without knowing. We have the saying in Zen, not knowing is most intimate. Be intimate with people that you are not familiar with, and really let them express themselves without having to come back with evidence you're a good person. You don't need it, and so that, yeah, I'm in agreement with Kelly. It really is about hearing the people that we're not used to being with, that opens that up. That's who's always taught me.
That's right. And listening not simply with our ears, but listening
Yeah,
with our hearts.
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So I
Peace.
think, Greg, yep.
I think it's time, yes? Okay. Kelly, thank you for always
No.
lovingly engaging me and pushing and wrestling and doing all the work of understanding this together.
Well, thank you, Greg, and thank you each and every time. And I mean this, that we are together and that we are in conversation. I am made better. And so on this journey of that is our friendship, thank you for making me better. And thank you.
Thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you for joining us and listening to us talk. And I'm sorry we couldn't get to everyone's questions, but it's really good to be with you. And I hope to see you the next time we do this. So, and I hope that Kelly and I are back together again at some point. I think that's a plan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bye now.
Bye.